Hey everyone, we're glad that you've joined us for another segment here at Let's Talk, where we talk about the sermon or any other things going on right now. Today we are talking about a sermon and e-series that we started this week, dealing with difficult people.
Hmm.
And then the first lesson,
Dealing
which
with
one?
dealing with mean people, and how I tried to categorize that in the sermon was we all have to bounce off of certain people who are just kind of known for being mean. They're kind of known for having a bad attitude. They're kind of known for being angry or surly or frustrating. Not talking necessarily about people who are mean to you that one time, but that's not really how they're characterized by, or even people who are just mean to you, but they're not really mean to anybody else. Because often when that happens, you're part of the reason why they're so mean to you. But those people who they warn you about your first day of the job, they say don't get too close to Sharon, she's a handful, or don't watch out for Tom because he can really chew your head off if it's those people, and how we bounce off of them. And we talked about it on Sunday, and most of the sermon Sunday was about the call from Christ to pay evil back with good as much as we can, and to do it because that's what he does. And I quoted a verse out of Luke 6:35. It's one of my favorite verses. It says that we should show grace to our enemies, show love to our enemies, and to pray and bless those who are hard on us. Because when we do that, we're like sons of the Most High. Because God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. That last line, that God is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, that one, for whatever reason, it's like a splinter in my head. When I heard that, I couldn't get that thought out. And God is continually showing grace to people who don't deserve it, and that's what He expects His disciples to do. If you're one of His followers, then He expects you to show grace and kindness to people who really don't deserve it because they're ornery. And so most of the sermon was talking about
Do you
that.
think the thought there is that we think, well, why is God good to these people? They don't deserve it. That God could just as well say, well, you don't deserve it either, but I
Right.
give it to you.
I think so. And God doesn't let the one thing that we as people do, one thing that human beings do, is sometimes we let the very worst people in our lives determine what kind of people we're going to be. Somebody has treated us mean, or they abandoned us, or they were hateful to us, or they even abusive to us, and we allow their bad behavior to make us bad people. And that's very easy to do. And in fact, most people at some point or another struggle with that a little bit. And yet, God never does that. Even when people run His name down or are hateful to Him. And we saw it in Jesus' life when He was a man here. Even when the people were cruel to Him and mean, He always responded with grace. And it wasn't that He couldn't say a hard word now and again, because he did do that. But he never gave up on people. He never quit trying to reach people, and so we want to make sure that we don't let bad people make us into bad people, because it's real easy to do.
So as we go on with this video, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them here, because we'll read them and we'll talk about them. I think that always makes for a good conversation, especially in topics like this, where you may have a personal story or a question for something you've been dealing with, because this is a common thing.
Right.
We all, at some point, have dealt with difficult people. And the joke, I don't know if you made it on Sunday, was that if you don't know any mean people, it's probably because you
Probably
are that
because
mean
you are
person.
one,
Yeah.
right? And it's not hard to find illustrations of it. I mean, even today, I saw a story about Quentin Tarantino, and if you're not familiar with him, he's a director and sometimes actor, and he's made a lot of pretty well-known movies, Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and they're movies that do very well in the Oscars and usually pretty R-rated, but they're well-known movies, and he's become a millionaire because of the movies that he's written and that he's directed. And he was on a podcast a couple of days ago, and in the middle of the podcast, told the host that he's never given his mother any of it, that he's made all this money, and he didn't, because when he was a kid, uh, growing up, he had told her he was going to make movies one day. He was going to write movies, and she mocked him for it. She said, your little movie career, that's great, but that's over. You need to focus on real things. And so he decided as a kid, okay, but when I make it big, you're not getting anything, you know. And so in the podcast, he talked about that. I've never bought her a house, never bought her a Cadillac. I've never bought any of that because she made fun of me that one time. And when I read the comments underneath of the article, it seemed like most people agreed with him. Yeah, she deserves it. Anybody who does that to a kid doesn't deserve to get anything. And yeah, anybody who would ever say a bad word like that. And it made me think that most people commenting surely haven't been parents, because I mean every parent blows it sooner or later with something, because we're human. But I found myself kind of on the other side. And if he don't want to give her money, it's his money. Do what you want to with it. And I'm not judging him for that, because who knows? But and I don't know what the woman was like. He didn't really go into a lot of detail about it. And maybe she was just a misunderstood person, or maybe she was one of those mean people that we talk about in the sermon. But it was clear from how he was talking that this woman and her bad comment made now 30 or 40 years ago was still occupying a lot of real estate in his head. I mean, it was still, you could still get a rise out of him all these years later bringing it up. And I don't think, strictly speaking, that's who we want to be. That's all I'm really saying with this. Sometimes you can't help it, but that's not who we want to be. I mean, in our best self and our best vision of ourselves, I don't think that's, the person who holds on to the grudge to the bitter end, whatever the grudge is. I don't think that's who we want to be. So that's what I was trying to get into on Sunday.
You said that you think the people that commented on that may have been people that had never been parents. I wonder if it's people, maybe they are parents, but they had parents like that.
Oh, sure.
And
right.
Maybe they wish they would have pursued a dream and they did something like that. Mine? Oh, I just did. Yeah. I have my mic too far.
Well, no, me too. I think the hard part with right. We've all had. I mean, I joke about it with new parents that you're the reason your kids will be in counseling one day, and it's just. I mean, a lot of us have had one or two things we wished our moms or dads would have done different, and as a dad myself, it's certainly been enjoyable when one of my kids tells me that, I think you could have handled this better, or whatever. And it's just part of the human experience, right? I mean, we're all trying to do the best we can. But for some people, and again, maybe for Quentin Tarantino, I don't know him, and I certainly don't know his mom. Maybe she was exceptionally tough in some moments, and I've heard stories about people who went through things that were exceptionally difficult or exceptionally hard, and I know that can wreck you. I'm not pretending like it's no big deal, and I'm not certainly suggesting that it should become no big deal. I'm not saying that at all. Right. But I think the grace of Christ is bigger, and when we lean hard into it, I think the reason, on different tack, that Jesus tells us to forgive so freely and so easily is because it's best for us, and not best for us like kale is good for you, but best for us in that it really helps you get to the best life. I mean, you'll see immediate result from it if you can learn to show some grace, and it's how we're designed. We're just not designed to hold on to these grudges.
There's this music, or there's this line by this really famous poet called Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
He has this line that says that he talks about unforgiveness and how unforgiveness keeps us in control. And I think about that very often. I've talked about this line very often, maybe in these videos. But the thought of it, when we choose to not forgive, we choose to be the victim.
Mm-hmm.
We choose to make them the villain.
Right.
And then we keep that as long as we want.
Right.
When you choose to not forgive someone, you're making other people the mean people.
Right.
You're making them the ones that hurt you. And I wonder how many times in my own life have I thought someone was really my enemy, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're over it. Maybe they're
right.
not mean at all. I just choose to not forgive. So in my eyes, I make them the bad guy. And now we're talking about, what if they're not mean?
Right.
To us, they're mean, but
right.
It's a thing you say all the time. How your 20s and 30s,
right?
You think everyone talks about you.
Right.
Then in your 50s, you don't care, and then in your 60s, realize they weren't talking about you anyways.
Right.
How many times in life do we just think all these mean people around us and they're against us, and then it's like, I wonder if most of these people even care.
Even when they really are genuinely mean, hateful, awful people, and there are mean, hateful, awful people in the world, the thing, it's the sad part from a distance watching it, when they've not been mean to me, I'm watching somebody else struggle with it, is the person who was picked on is giving themselves an ulcer, imagining how they could get even or how they could straighten that out or how they're one day going to show the other person. And the person who was mean isn't thinking about them at all. I mean, they're sleeping fine every night.
Right.
And you, I'm not saying that you let the wickedness go in the sense that I hope there's justice one day. I think that's part of what Judgment Day is about, and that one day heaven and hell, God's going to make things right. I believe that. But when we try, that's part of the wisdom of the command in the Old Testament. It's mine to avenge, God says. We just don't have it in us. I wanted to say just really quickly, though, two other things about it, two verses, just to keep in mind as a counterbalance. One of the limits of a sermon is I don't have time to get into everything, and I don't have time to explain all the possible connection points. But there were a couple of things that if I could have gotten into it, I would have done. One of them is in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 24. He says, "Don't make friends with a hot-tempered man." Just don't even do it. Some people are so mean and so hateful and so ornery. Just don't make friends with them. And I think even though it's Old Testament Proverbs, that's still wisdom for the New Testament too. Some people are so angry, so hateful, so whatever. If you allow yourself to get too deeply into their orbit, you'll become just like them. And you're allowed, scripturally speaking, to recognize your own limitations. If somebody being around them just takes you down a bad path, every time I'm around them I go down a bad path, then you're allowed not to be around them. And
that's coming from the wisest man on earth,
right,
besides Jesus.
Right.
For him to say, guys, I've done it, don't mess with it.
Yeah, and that's not being a bad Christian. I mean, we need to reach out to everybody, and I guess there's probably a counterbalance to that verse too. I mean, if no one reaches out to the mean person, how are they going to find about Jesus? And I understand all that thing.
But he said make friends.
Right. It's allowing yourself to be emotionally connected, emotionally compromised. Where if I when I'm with them all the time, I start acting like they do. And that it's all about influence. So that's one thing. Just kind of keep in mind, and you could do a whole sermon just on that verse. It's a deep verse if you really think about it. The other one's in Titus, a New Testament deal. Paul starts off in chapter 3 of Titus, verse 9, telling his people to avoid foolish controversies or arguments and quarrels. He says it's just unprofitable and useless. And so he's talking to the church there, and maybe this is a church that's struggling a lot with arguing, and some churches do struggle a lot with arguing. And then he has a line in there. He says, verse 10, "Warn a divisive person once and warn him a second time, and after that have nothing to do with them. You can be sure such people are warped and sinful and they're self-condemned." Your mother probably told you when you were a kid it takes two to argue. I have found in my life that that's not true. It just takes one if they're motivated enough. One person all by themselves can stir up the pot for everybody. One person all by themselves can wreck a church, can wreck a family, can wreck a friendship, one person can do it. And so Titus warns you, or cautions his people, warn somebody like that. Hey, are you sure this is the road you want to go down to? Warn them a second time, but eventually you just have to move on. Mm-hmm. I mean, some people are just, because of their meanness, they're dangerous for you to be around. And that's New Testament and Old Testament, two different verses that kind of hit on it. I know that even with those verses, you can take that too far where you're avoiding anybody who makes you uncomfortable. And that's not what I'm saying. It's the people who are mean and divisive and hot-tempered, and they're taking you down. They make you mean and divisive and hot-tempered when you're around them. There's a point where you can say, I tried. I just don't have it in me to continue that relationship. So I would have talked about that if I'd had more time.
And I don't, maybe it's because it's a Sunday thing, right? A Sunday morning thing. We think we can't get into things without getting too specific. And this may be the best time to talk about things like that. Like you're at a church preaching and you're talking about mean people, and saying these things may feel like you're singling them out or saying, don't hang out with these people that are sitting here, right? And that's not what we mean at all, but this is more for your personal growth. We need to talk about these things, right? There are people in your life that, I still have those people that I see and it's just like, this person,
right.
And you need to ask God for grace, for strength, for compassion, because there are those people that do that, and we have them, and it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to create distance. It's okay to not let these people influence your life decisions, and This is not. We're not to take this to the other extreme though, and say cut off all mean people from your life.
Right.
Don't talk to them.
Right.
It's just what in Proverbs it says. It's just don't make them your close group of friends. Right?
And on those verses at the end, the Proverbs verse and the Titus 3 verse that I talked about, specifically, it's people that when you're with them and you're deep with them, you start becoming like that. You become mean. You become hateful. You become hot-tempered. There are, for all of us, people who are a challenge. I'm not talking about that. And there are people, for all of us, who take a lot of energy just to deal with them. I'm not talking about that either. Jesus, thank God, dealt with people who take a lot of energy, or I wouldn't be saved. So I'm not saying to cut off all. You're not so precious that you get to avoid anybody who makes your blood pressure go up. Right. I'm not saying that. But it's the people who, when you're with them very long, you start arguing more. When you're with them very long, you start taking a hateful attitude. It's the people that your husband and wife might say to you, I don't like you when you hang out with them, or I don't like how you become. You're a different person. That's the ones the Bible are warning you about, and it's really more about your weakness. Maybe you'll get to a place in Jesus where you're so strong it doesn't affect you anymore, right. But you're not there yet. And it's just being honest about that.
Mm-hmm. Amanda, you can turn me up a little bit on channel 3 on the.
Well, we're almost done.
The red box.
We're almost done. Was there anybody that we need to?
Thomas said that he likes the rat poison analogy that you use.
Yeah,
on dealing with people like that.
It's an Anne Lamott quote. She said, "Unforgiveness is like eating rat poison and then waiting for the rat to die," and it's the truth. You give yourself an ulcer, worrying about the other person and what they do, and you're not. And the other person's doing fine. The right. Rat really isn't affected by it at all. And you're thinking by holding the grudge that you're getting even. You're just hurting yourself.
See, lately I'm more interested in that aspect of us dealing with people. Is yes, no doubt there are mean people in our lives, but how many of those things that we think are problems are us, mm-hmm. right? The unforgiveness, the holding a grudge against a mean person. Are we being mean back to them? Right. When I talk to people, and we may talk about some things that they're going through, and this person told me this. Well, what did you say right before? Well, I said this. Well, that makes sense.
There you go.
So many times we like to think that we're the victim. Right. I did nothing wrong. I don't know why I'm in this situation. Right. But then you can look back at, and so not that I'm always going to say it's our fault, but how many times I wonder most of these situations we're in is because of something we said or something, right. or how we treated others.
Right.
And you may be dealing with a difficult person. So don't hear me say that it's probably you, but we all need to evaluate ourselves. So many times is it us? Can we be honest and humble ourselves for a minute and think, are we the ones causing trouble sometimes? Right. Are we not the only one? Or are we always the victim?
Right. The hard part with forgiveness and forgiveness lessons is there's never really a time when you're over it. I mean, if somebody really has hurt you, even if you're part of the reason they hurt you, you did something to them and they got even and it hurt. If somebody's hurt you, you're hurt. I mean, you can pretend like you're not, and I'm going to get to a different place and not think about it. But the pain is real, and you're really dealing with it, and the trauma is real, and you're really dealing with it, and nobody can make you forgive or let go of it unless you want to. And I'm not telling you that either. I mean, I could be abusive in a weird way if I tell you have to let something go, and I'm not talking about criminal stuff. Certainly criminal stuff, you can prosecute that. If somebody's done something illegal, I mean, you're allowed to tell the police, you're allowed to make it right. You're allowed to do all those things. But even in that situation, if you're still going to have to eventually tell God that he'll have to handle this, that it's bigger than you. It's more than you can do, and that he'll ultimately have to make it completely right because we just don't have it in us. Mm-hmm. I'm going to have to go, sadly, so we're going to have to call it short. Sorry.
We're glad that you joined us for this. If you have any other questions, comment below. We'll get back to you and we'll talk about this. But we're going to be talking about dealing with difficult people for the next few weeks. So next week is dealing with
needy people. People who take a lot of energy.
Okay. Interesting. So thank you for joining us today. We'll see you here next week.